There's no shortage of ports and remakes of Nintendo, Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis, and other platforms on the Game Boy Advance, and in 2002 we finally got one from the Kirby series with Nightmare in Dreamland. Now, if you don't know, Nightmare in Dreamland is actually a remake of 1993's Kirby's Adventure on the Nintendo Entertainment System, and it was the second game in the Kirby series right after Kirby's Dreamland on the Game Boy. Kirby's Adventure's claim to fame was that it was the first game in the series to introduce the famous copy abilities. The mechanic was such a big hit that it became a staple and is found in just about every Kirby game to date. When Nintendo decided to remake this game, they chose to keep everything very faithful to the original. And I think this was a good call because the gameplay is already fun and the game already has great level design, but it's a perfect opportunity to give it a fresh coat of paint on the Game Boy Advance. And immediately, that's the first thing you're going to notice when you boot this game up is the sprite work is phenomenal. The game is popping with colors and the animations are terrific, and there's no denying right away you're playing a Kirby game. And there is a story here, albeit a basic one. King Dedede steals the Star Wand from Dreamland, breaks it into 5 pieces, and it's up to Kirby to retrieve them all. The game is comprised of 7 worlds, each filled with several stages. And throughout your run, as you're bopping enemies, you're going to have the opportunity to snag over 20 different copy abilities. And that's where the fun really happens. Completing a stage or defeating a boss doesn't really hinge on any specific ability, but there are some bosses that do have weaknesses, and also certain abilities can open specific doors. Specifically the hidden ones. Anytime you press a switch, it's going to lead to a new door, and that door can result in things like extra lives, boss fights, or even more copy abilities. There's also other doors that have mini games as well as a museum. The museum's a great place to snag another copy ability if you either want to swap one out or don't have one. Another great feature this game offers is multiplayer. I know it's a stretch, but if you find 3 other players that have the same cartridge, you can actually play co-op through the entire story. There is replayability value here as well. One of the unlockables you can look forward to is called Meta Nightmare, which gives you access to playing as the anti-hero Meta Knight. I can't think of too many Game Boy Advance games where you can unlock an antagonist, so I think this is a cool move on Nintendo's part. Also, for the completionists, if you manage to get 100% items in the entire game, you can unlock the extra game, which is basically a higher difficulty. For anyone who says Kirby games are too easy, that mode should certainly pose a challenge to you. I think my absolute favorite thing about this game is actually the final boss with Nightmare. I would have to put it up there with the final boss fights in games like Metroid Fusion and The Legend of Zelda: The Minish Cap. It's executed quite well and does a great job at showcasing what the Game Boy Advance graphics could do. I almost forgot to mention the soundtrack. If you've played a Kirby game, you know exactly what they sound like. This one does not let down at all. Furthermore, there's a menu option where you can actually listen to the game's soundtrack as well as the sound effects. This is something you don't see too often on the Game Boy Advance. Overall, this is a superb Kirby game. I don't know if I'd call it the best, but it's certainly up there. And if you're a fan of retro gaming at all, this is 100% a must-play, especially for the Game Boy Advance. If you've been following Nintendo Switch news for a while, you might recall that the Nintendo Switch Online will eventually offer Kirby and the Amazing Mirror for the Game Boy Advance service. This leads me to believe that we'll eventually get Nightmare in Dreamland online as well. Now, if you're a collector, just know that this game has gone up in value over the last 20 years. Currently, it goes for about $50 on the resale market, which isn't too bad, and certainly it's not the most expensive cartridge out there, so I definitely think it's one worth going after. Anyway, that's all I had for this video. Let me know if you've played Kirby Nightmare in Dreamland before. Do you think it's the best GBA remake? Do you have a favorite copy ability? Let me know in the comments. And as always, thanks for watching.